like to call the meeting to order. Please rise. We'll say the pledge together.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Would you please call the roll?
Yes. Mrs. Fiesel?
Yes.
Mrs. Regola-Dye?
Yes.
Mrs. Gatzman? Yes. Dr. Bennett?
Yes. Thank you. Approval of the minutes. I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from July 16th.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Regola-Dye. Do we have a second?
I'll be glad to second.
And were there any corrections? Would you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Regola-Dye?
Yes.
Mrs. Fiesel?
Yes.
Mrs. Gatzman?
Yes.
Dr. Bennett?
Yes, motion carried. Good. I'd like to welcome everyone this evening and I guess congratulate our superintendent on a wonderful first day back and all of our teachers and administrators. And, I think everything's gone really smoothly and our bus drivers are getting everyone there safely. So I know Mrs. Gatzman and I were at the middle school for their opening. It was really exciting. The kids were very excited to be there, to be back. So I hope everyone feels like that and has a good year. Mrs. Gatzman, would you like to share?
I would say kudos to all of that, and the schools are in amazing shape. Our summer crew did a great job getting us up and ready for the new year, so hats off to them as well. I know the administrative team, we've had some few changes and moves, and I know they're excited to get busy. So it's been a great year so far. Good start.
Well, thank you for taking time to come this evening. I just still am so impressed with the opening session for all the staff to come back. And so for those that didn't get to be part of that, it was basically thinking as the word be as an active part, and then just be kind, be courteous, and just so many different things. Be helpful, be respectful, and then t-shirts. Everyone did get a t-shirt, all the staff. So I keep wondering how the administration keeps topping, the program speakers, but I think they've just all plateaued over the top. I mean, you pay to go to those types of things, and you're at a conference or something. We have that for our staff. So, and then, I just coming in tonight, as well as the academics, all that will be going on, but the sports schedule, all the activities for kids that we part of, etc. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you all, including our staff and all employees, for continuing to help our children become well educated. I was just thinking that even though the children are not here in the summertime, education never quits. The school system never stops. There's always work being done to help our children achieve and become great contributing members to our society. So you're part of that, so we want to thank you.
Well, I too would like to welcome you all here. It has been a really positive start, and that doesn't just happen certainly with one person, trust me. I mean, I've got folks in the back, and we've got a professional development committee. We meet in the spring, and we try to come up with creative ideas just to be a theme for the year and to make it fun and exciting and motivating. And so there's a lot of other people that go into that. I will say that I was in every building on Thursday and Friday. And I actually had principals coming up and going, pinch me, or it was, knock on wood, I don't want to jinx anything, but it's been the smoothest start that they've had in some time. The only group that may have a contrary to that would have been bus drivers. If you've been around Mount Vernon, Herod Street is closed, so the bus garage is way over there, and they're going downtown, and then they closed off the square on opening day, and so, but it really kudos to our summer staff. We're doing a great job, and of course, we're excited to have everyone back, so thank you for that.
Thank you. And we have some public participation. Were there any reports that you wanted to share?
No reports at this time.
did you see?
Darcy, do you have anything?
Nope.
Good.
Just good start. We're rocking and rolling, so nope, good start. So,
Okay, great, thank you so much. I had down April Thompson, so.
Darcy is the new president this year. Welcome aboard,
That's why I
Darcy.
didn't-
yeah, thanks.
Yes, we snuck her in there as president.
Thanks, Darcy.
Yeah.
Okay, we have some public participation, and Andrew White is first.
Do you want me to stand? I've
Sure,
never
you
been
Whatever
to
you
meetings
feel
here.
comfortable.
So, last year, June of 2017, I wrote a letter to the Ohio Board of Education, and I think I CC'd this board, I can't remember, it was over a year ago. The bulk of the letter is about the third grade reading guarantee, and then the academic push down of that. And what I'm going to read from this letter is about keyboarding instruction in kindergarten. So I'm just going to read. It's a little dense, I apologize. Keyboarding instruction has been implemented in kindergartens across the district in this past year. I think that is the case for most schools. This is in addition to the sometimes hours of seat work, didactic and screen-based instruction that so many kindergarten classrooms spend their poor academic time doing. In 2017, the kindergarten classroom in our building, that's Wigan Street, was requested to remove their construction, loose parts, creativity, arts, fine motor activity area to make room for a bank of 5 computers with keyboards so that incoming kindergartners, my daughter at that time among them, could participate in keyboarding instruction. Keyboarding instruction for 5- and 6-year-olds is completely developmentally and educationally inappropriate. Phonics involves matching letters to sounds and visual coordination of the eyes with a sound. This is a motor activity as well as a cognitive activity. It involves integration of at least 3 to 4 systems: ocular motor, cognitive attention, and listening and or producing sound. It's a heavy cognitive load for a non-reader or beginning reader. Kindergartners need to be able to learn to associate a visual letter with an auditory sound, either B with B or B with B, the letter name. They should not be searching for and locating a geographic location for each letter and involving their arms and fingers. These are not a helpful association to be making when learning to pair letters with their associated sounds. They need to prioritize pairing letters with their sounds for reading. It is not only overly complicated and likely motorically very difficult, it is also teaching them associations that could confuse and delay the eye-letter-sound associations that need to be learned to the point of automaticity. Further, we want to develop the efficiency of their eyeballs left to right across text, not their eyeballs from the screen to the keyboard and back to the screen. The development of their motoric base is not yet ready for keyboard as a mediated vehicle between letters and sounds. Learning activities that are appropriate for this age include pre-reading and large gross motor activity with both sides of the body integrating left and right. Further, kindergartners' hands are not yet large enough for a keyboard, and for many, the fine motor control and eye-hand coordination necessary to master keyboard typing, or even be minimally efficient, has not yet developed. Most children of this age should be working on grip strength with pencils, crayons, and markers, providing appropriate pressure to produce writing, or more developmentally appropriate, coloring and drawing. And the eye-hand coordination for an activity that is a direct manipulation, their eyes to their hand and the crayon tip, and which immediately produces an outcome, not a keyboard stroke to screen that is mediated by the keyboard. Developing fine motor coordination like drawing and coloring to improve eye-hand coordination so their eyes get used to looking at and producing print and drawing is appropriate. They also need the language skills of listening to and producing words, listening to stories, learning and performing choral chants, and singing are much more valuable to building a strong linguistic base than is attempting to compose writing on a screen through a keyboard. They're being asked to learn keyboarding at this age for the sole purpose of preparing them to take the third grade reading guarantee test. That was my comment last year, and that was also what our principal told us when he requested $9,000 from the PTO for Chromebooks for kindergartners at Wigan Street. Now, he didn't make the direct ask yet. That's, I'm assuming, coming in the future, but he told us it would cost $9,000 for 44 Chromebooks. I'm almost done. We see children's random movements as attention deficit when it is more likely to be immaturity or actually just typical age appropriateness in their physical motoric systems. Their proprioceptive and vestibular systems are still developing. Rather than keyboarding and seat work, the curriculum needs perceptual motor activities and opportunities to challenge and practice postural control, gross motor, physical activity, not training the children to sit for longer and longer time periods. This type of training will only result in more children being identified and labeled as needing help. More children will be getting labeled and needing services, which is more expensive for the district in the long run. It will also serve to frustrate children who are not yet developmentally ready to type, which is most of them, resulting in behavioral and attentional challenges in the classroom. Recently published research from the University of Toledo, it might have hit your eyeballs last week, shows how blue light from screens and fluorescent lighting damages retinal cells and accelerates eye damage. Do we really want to expose our youngest children to these risks? Is the school going to provide blue light blocking glasses to prevent this damage? Each moment that a child spends in developmentally inappropriate practice is time that is lost to developmentally appropriate practice, and that will contribute to their frustration, dislike of the learning process, amotivation for learning, and alienation from school and the educational process. We know that one of the most developmentally and educationally important activities that children and other social mammals can participate in is play. The frontal lobes develop during play, opioids are released during play, and when animals are deprived of play as juveniles, they develop into adults who exhibit emotional dysregulation, including increased anxiety, depression, and social inhibition and aggression. And social animals that are deprived of play during their juvenile phase have trouble reproducing as adults. It's not a stretch to hypothesize that deprived of play, humans will seek positive stimulation elsewhere, for example, self-medicate with other activities or substances. Humans aged 3 to 6 need up to 3 hours of play a day in order to not exhibit problems associated with play deprivation. This is in addition to the recommended 2-3 hours a day of physical gross motor activity. By age 6 to 7, there's enough cortical inhibition to sit still and pay attention for short periods, but the bulk of a kindergarten day should still be spent in play.
Thank you. Courtney, did you copy?
Hi. My name's Courtney. I want to share, I'm really concerned. I was so excited for my boys to go to Wigan Street. I've been waiting 5 years knowing I moved back to Ohio, they were going to go to Wigan Street School. And I am devastated. I am crushed at the changes that Dr. Dill has made. And I was at the orientation on last Tuesday, and he made it seem really minimal. But when you add up what we're losing in music, in art and PE, I think if you do the math, you're losing 4 classes, which is a month of school, because it's only once a week. And that's for K through 2. And for 3 to 5, you're losing 7 weeks, which is almost a semester. So, or a quarter.
Mark here.
Right. So it's very disappointing. Of course, music is very personal to me. It's the only thing I remember, Mrs. Heppel in elementary school. But it did guide my whole life, my entire life. And we haven't been given a reason why the changes. Wigan Street does well, so why are they cutting these classes? And I'd like to know what research has been done on both ways. Research to minimize, what benefit does that have? And have we looked at research how important music is in early childhood education? So, leave it at that.
Thank you. And Jamie Ingledew?
Hi, thanks. My son's also at Wigan Street. He's in 1st grade. And I'm also concerned with some of the changes, especially regarding recess, because mine is a very active boy. And I also have, she's now 20, but she spent 2 years at Wigan Street, 4th and 5th grade, and graduated in 2016. And she had a diagnosis of ADHD. So I'm very concerned with giving kids enough time to move and to play, because they just perform so much better when they get that, and it's developmentally appropriate that they get that. So, and you know, I was surprised at these changes because we are, I think, Wigan Street's the highest performing school in the district, so I don't understand why the changes are necessary. The test scores are already really high, but most of the research I see, you know, that I read in the press is we're hearing stories over and over about schools that increase recess time and see a improvement in their test scores. So I don't understand why. It feels like we're moving backwards. So I don't really get that. I'd like to understand more of the reasoning behind that. You know, as everything I've read says recess has so many benefits, like cognitive, physical, and social. So not only it helps the test scores, it really does. I mean, I have a study in front of me that said after 20 minutes, you know, kids are more 20% more likely to earn an A in math or English. Their standardized test course increased 6%. Just one physically active lesson creates 13% increase in students' physical activity for the week, 21% decrease in teachers' time managing behavior. So I feel like a lot of these things we're asking kids to do, cutting recess, having them sit more, and then we call it a behavior problem when really it's just not developmentally appropriate expectations. I'm very concerned about that. Also, the research that shows that recess and play helps with self-regulation, executive function, all these things that we're worrying so much about that kids don't have enough of these days, but we're taking away what they need to get it. So that doesn't make sense to me. I think it's great that they've opened the playground for morning play. That's great because it's a great way to start the day. But I can't count that as recess. My child rides the bus. I don't know when he gets there. I mean, as you said, with traffic, you never know. Our bus was like 12 minutes late this morning, so I don't know what time he got there, and that's fine. But I can't count that as recess, you know. I need recess. It's like breaks at work. You don't count a break. If you show up early, you don't. That's not a break. They need breaks in between when they study. If a 6-year-old has a 2-hour whatever block in the afternoon, he's not going to do his best. And I really feel like if we cut recess, and they really need 20 minutes. They need to get into extended play. They need to be able to work out disagreements among themselves, you know, and maybe this is why our kids are having more trouble with that these days. They don't get enough time for that. But it really feels like, for my very active child, it's setting him up to fail. And that breaks my heart, because I saw my daughter struggle with ADHD, and, you know, we went through a lot with that, and I really don't want to see my very bright, very curious son who loves school and can't wait to learn, I don't want to see him set up to fail. So I'm very concerned about that. Thank you.
And Brandon, E-M-I-G.
That's me.
How do you say your last name?
Emick.
Emick, okay.
Thank you so much. First I want to thank you all. My daughter is a second grader, and she started school at Wigan Street in kindergarten. My son just started kindergarten a few days ago, and I have another little son who has yet to start. And absolutely loved Wigan Street. Was one of the reasons we decided to move to the actual area. My wife is a French professor at Kenyon, and about half of her colleagues actually live in places like Granville and Westerville and other parts of Columbus. And we considered, when we were in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is where we had been 5 years before that, where I was a professor of education. Before that I had taught in a high school for 6 years as well, from 9th through 12th grade science. We decided based upon the school. We looked at the reviews and we talked to people, and the play-based curriculum was a big deal to us. We were able to, you know, if we have to, pay for private school, consider moving, we could do things like that. And I share the disappointment here, and that's what I wanted to say. I'm shocked by what's happened. And part of that is we did go to, some of us went to the PTO meeting the other day, and I was able to learn from speaking with the principal and challenging some of his answers, or non-answers rather, that he basically barks out orders and tells the kindergarten teachers what to do, and you will do this, and had absolutely no idea how they felt about it, didn't care. And that to me was very disconcerting as an educator, because it doesn't take much to sow seeds of discord, and that passes through. So I'm starting to feel like Wigan Street is not the place for us anymore. And I'll hold my comments to just one issue, although I do share the recess concerns and the specials. But as far as technology is concerned, as a 9th grade science teacher, I pushed very hard for computers, lab equipment, Pasco and Vernier we had, and I used the computer labs as a teacher weekly, several times a week, for experiments, temperature monitoring and simultaneous pressure and volume and things like that, and it's indispensable. Obviously technology is indispensable as a tool, and I can appreciate that. I also, in my service component of my teaching, I was a teacher in the Philadelphia area of Pennsylvania, was volunteered to repair computers, carry them around, get them to repair and replace them and things like that. And I organized a committee of students and other faculty who did that. So I can very much appreciate that. I left my teaching job to form a company with some colleagues, which is actually a software company. And that software is actually used in education. And it's used at places like Harvard and Penn and Yale and Penn State and many others, over 70 universities worldwide, and by other countless high schools and elementary schools even. So I appreciate technology. However, some of the standards, keyboarding for kindergartners, I just can't support that. I can't support not only the expense, but the fact that the cognitive load, as Andrea alluded to, is not germane. It's not pertinent to the task of reading. When you're looking at kindergarten, a good friend, a good book, learning to understand and communicate with one another, 2 + 2, etc. Those are important things. And to interject technology, it kind of puts them on the same plane as those things, and I don't think they belong there. I think that they should be introduced when a child has a more global sense of the world, what things are important, how to write, not searching for an A key when he barely knows what an A looks like, for example. Also, furthermore, if we consider analogies in the past, margarine was wonderful until it wasn't. Trans fats can kill you and increase heart rate. Coca-Cola used to have cocaine in it, and I'm sure the pharmacies that sold it recommended it highly. And heroin, all of those things, amphetamine, those were used in World War II. These are things that started with a flair. They were encouraged. Societal context, they're widening use, increasing use in society. We realize, oh my God, there's repercussions to this. Technology is the same. A lot of these standards date to before there was sexting, cyberbullying, blue light study that interferes with your sleep patterns. So I really, personally, if I could, control the world, I would eliminate technology probably until 4th or 5th grade. And that doesn't mean that they can't know what a mouse is and what a computer's for, but I think that it has to have its place in the growing child's development and be appropriate. And I'm not able to support the initiative of having Chromebooks, laptops of any kind in a kindergarten classroom. And I wanted to say that, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Would you like to say?
Sure. Well, I certainly appreciate you sharing your concerns. I would certainly encourage you, and it sounds like maybe some of you have, shared those concerns with Dr. Dill. I became aware of a little bit of this consternation over the weekend. And I was shared some Facebook posts, which I found a little disheartening, but Dr. Dill is an outstanding administrator. And he cares about his kids deeply, and he may look at things a little differently, but I guess I would ask that you give him a chance. I mean, here's someone who voluntarily said, I'd like to go out there. I think it's a special place, and of course every administrator wants to put their little flavor, and technology is his passion. But he's always been very reasonable, and I think if you have conversations, now you may still walk away and maybe not be on the same, you may agree to disagree, but I think they'll listen. I don't know how many of you have had a chance just to really have a sit-down conversation with him. Andrea did, kind of. I mean, of course he and I talked a little bit about this today because I came in and we had a conversation, and it did prompt me to take a look at some things. I mean, for instance, I didn't know about the technology thing that Andrea had brought up, and we could look at the standards. I don't think we're teaching master, typing in kindergarten. We're teaching some basics. But when it comes to technology, I don't see it as a passing fad, unfortunately, or fortunately. I see it even growing. As Andrea had mentioned, our kids, to take the tests that the state make us take, you have to be, at least at some level, be able to type, paragraphs to pass this 3rd grade reading guarantee, whether we like it or not. I mean, we struggle with those same questions in the state as well. But what it prompted me to do a little bit today was just to ask some more questions. So what was recess last year? What was recess this year? What is recess like across the district? And so I've begun to gather some of that information. So recess was certainly one of those conversations. The other was specials. I mean, I would like to believe that I know that this board, and I believe all of our administrators, value specials. Art, music, and PE, and library, even library to a point where we added another hour to librarians this year. I mean, there was a time where it was cut back to 4 hours. They're now back to 6 hours a day. And so we do value those programs. So looking at specials, I began to start to take a look at specials. And I know it sounds like Wigan Street was at about 50 minutes last year, right? I think for art, PE, and music. Well, I have some folks back here from our teachers, and so, you know, I can tell you, and I don't have them all at this point, but I don't know if any other school is doing 50 minutes.
East.
Now, the principals that I've talked to were all talking 45.
Third through fifth is 50 minutes at East.
I'm sorry?
Third through fifth is 50 minutes
Okay.
at East.
And I can certainly double check with them, because I want to be accurate in what we say. So, but I think if we have the conversations, you know, I think there's reasonableness that can come from this. But I so want Wigan Street to embrace a principal, and for a principal to embrace Wigan Street, and we just haven't gotten off on the best foot. And I do believe he is an outstanding administrator. And I hope that you give him a chance to talk through these things. Go
I
ahead.
apologize. There's one point that I forgot that was not related to what I said there. Many people have conveyed to me similar thoughts but are afraid to speak up because, as you know, Wigan Street is approximately 50% opt-in that are not zoned for that, and they're afraid that they'll lose their place. Will you confirm to us publicly now that they will not lose their spot for their child if they speak out and have a disagreement, perhaps?
I can confirm that. I mean,
Yes.
I don't even know who's open and, I mean, I can go look it up, I guess, who's open enrolled and who's not, but certainly, I mean, if I would ever feel like I would get involved in that, that would be just against what I believe. So it would have nothing to do with that. But I think having good, open conversation about it is important. I mean, I really think it is. I think you'll find him to be reasonable. I think there is that fine balance between, all right, who runs the school, the support from his community, that dialogue going back and forth. If it's just my way or my way, then we get into these battles like we see right now across our government, that nothing ever gets done. And I just would implore you to kind of keep that open mind. And I'm going to have conversations with Matt about keeping an open mind, looking at this from all perspectives, from recess time to specials, and see if there's some way here. And it is important to know what's going on around our district. I mean, I got to be honest, and I'll verify, but of all the principals who responded to me today, not one said they were doing 50 minutes of specials, not one. They were all 45. So you have our word. I'll speak for the board, I'll let the board speak for themselves. We'll certainly look into it and have conversations about it. So that I can promise you. I guess I would just, again, when Facebook posts were shared to me after folks really not even getting to know Dr. Dill, that just seemed pretty negative right off the bat. I mean, it was disheartening. Honestly, it was, and I hope for better. I mean, we want Wigan Street. There's Mary Catherine, and we're looking to do Spanish as a second language at Wigan Street because we think it's got some real uniquenesses and opportunities with her being there and coming in. I mean, truth be told, I'd love to look at down the road even IB elementary kinds of things. I mean, so we have those bigger conversations, but obviously it all can't just happen right away. And so I think you have our word that we'll always keep an open mind and look into those kinds of things. Whether we'll always agree, I'm going to say there'll be times when we won't, but we can agree to disagree and do what we feel is best for our kids. Is that fair enough?
No.
Yeah,
No, it is
am I
not.
allowed to just say one more thing?
No, you had your turn.
I understand giving him a chance. He didn't give us a chance.
That's right.
He just came in and did it.
Yep.
He didn't give Wigan Street a chance. He should have seeing what was happening
Well,
first.
to that, I would say, I understand what you're saying, but we're not talking about a new administrator. We're talking about someone who's had well over 10 years, who has sat in a superintendent's chair and has really made some wonderful things happen at Columbia. And so it's not like he felt like he needed to go ask permission for scheduling. And I hope that we don't believe here that we have to go to the community and say, well, can we schedule this class, and how do we schedule, and how many minutes? I mean, then we're getting into a whole nother arena that I think we got to be a little careful of. But I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think he can make decisions and stuff, but I just think it
Fundamentally change the character of the school, and it is no longer an appropriate place for us.
Yeah.
And we have an escalation list, and we will maintain these conversations for a few months. Then we're going to media. When we go to media, we'll start at Kennedy, and we'll have the favorable student write an article. He refuses also to meet with us as a group. The media will meet with us as a group, and we are many more than we are here. Then we're going to go to Columbus television stations. We'll do what we have to do. I hate to become adversarial. It is not acceptable for them to change the character of the school. He's pushing back on play, thinking that it is just for fun. It is not just for fun in the kindergarten. It's actually an effective theory-based, evidence-based, data-based way to teach. It's perhaps the best way to teach. And he is not a fan of it, and he wants to do away with it.
So with all due respect,
This is not acceptable.
with all due respect, does it have to be the way you want it to be, or
No,
we're going
for
to media,
us,
we're doing everything?
we're going to leave the school. We're going to leave the district, and we're going to leave the school, and we're not the only ones. And I want you to, that's true. I mean, it just is. I hope that we don't have to do that. It's not fun to move. I don't like it.
So what do you sense is the difference in the recess? Because you've mentioned that a couple times. How much
Well,
recess
first of
has
all,
been
he
taken
misrepresented several things on his slideshow. He says he has 9.5 years principal experience, including this one. Who includes this one? He then later rounded that to 10 years, which is fine. But when you take subtle tweaks of the truth like that, it makes me question right off the bat. He also said that he counted 20 minutes in the morning when most kids aren't even able to be there, and the bell rings when they're in the cafeteria at what time? They have 10, basically, if they're lucky. That doesn't count as recess. Recess, when a judge adjourns for recess, you have to be in progress. You have to have, the court has to be in session. You can't have recess in the beginning. It's great that it's open, but that's not a recess. That's not a mental break. So that's fundamentally unacceptable to us. That's not just tweaking around the edges. I don't care when you have PE or when you have, English, it doesn't matter. But you've taken away a fundamental thing that is the character of the school.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. As a 35-year veteran in public schools and teaching at many different buildings, I understand some of your consternation, because as a teacher, I would often have a new principal, and I went through quite a few, and there were a lot of vast changes that occurred. And some of them, as I've told the governor in the past, some of them worked out well, and some of them didn't. I know from having been around Dr. Dill, and also being part of the Facebook of Columbia School when he had been there, he instituted a panther, that wasn't panthers, it was tiger up, which was a type of playtime that the children were able to get together with a different teacher that had nothing to do with their classroom. And they talked to the teacher, they played games with them, and then he also had quite a few assemblies. If you ever had a chance to look back on the Facebook pages from Columbia, there were quite a few assemblies where the children were all in the gymnasium dancing, carrying on, and having a great time. Change is very difficult, and I understand that. As a parent also, I understand that. And I would just echo what Superintendent Cedar had said, that when we are dealing with our children, there's no other thing that's more important to us. Nothing is more important than our children. So when we look at changes that occur, the first thing we think of is, how is it going to affect my child? And then we get very anxious. I know I did with my son. But then when I would step back away a little bit and calm down a little bit And I said, okay, I've got to give this teacher a chance, I have to give this school a chance. And it worked out fine. There were things that I didn't like, but there were things that I did. And so I want you to please keep the dialogue going and to please talk to Superintendent Cedar, talk to Dr. Dell, and maybe if we all approach this from the idea of all of us learning right along with our children. I remember once when we had a change at Pleasant Street that was really big at the beginning of the day, really, really big. And the principal said, sometimes we have to teach everybody, the teachers, the children, the custodians, and all of us. We are all learners in some way. So I really appreciate your passion, I appreciate your consternation and what you're going through inside here, because when you put your head down on the pillow at night, the only thing that you think about is the safety of your children. And of course we keep that in mind too, is our children being safe. So thank you, keep the dialogue going, and please go ahead and speak to Dr. Dell and keep the dialogue open with Superintendent Cedar. I think we can make it. Thank
The
you.
gentleman's been trying to.
Yeah, hi. I'm the ADHD kid who didn't sign his name to. I'm Steve Van Holt, and I'm actually here not as a parent today, but as a former teacher. Because I taught in the schools grades 4 through 8 for a few years before becoming a college teacher. And I've inflicted my middle school techniques on my college students ever since, to their amusement and dismay. But in the school that I taught in, we had a lot of students who were, I guess, not particularly verbal, not particularly oriented towards numerical learning, nonlinear learners. And they, for those students, things like art and movement and vocalization, singing, just taking time in different ways was not only desirable, it was really necessary. These were kids, you know, I think it was, someone was talking about being concerned about having their child set up to fail. A lot of the kids I taught in that school system were or had been set up to fail in sort of a mainstream curriculum, and they were not doing well with it. And I realize, of course, you are teaching and running a public school system, but it's important, I think, for the students, and I'm not talking about my kids here. We know there's a whole bunch of other issues there, and I'm not going to get into them. But it's important to serve all the kids in all the ways that we possibly can. And I think it's really essential to not push too hard to regiment people too soon. And I understand, of course, and I'm very appreciative of the fact that you are up against state standards and you're concerned about meeting these marks in 3rd grade and these marks in 5th grade, et cetera, and that is the challenge and the difficulty of teaching in the public schools. But I think it's really essential to give those non-traditional learners an opportunity to find their way. And so-called specials, and I don't like that word because I think that is part of the centrality of education, are absolutely crucial to what they're doing. And if I see evidence of any erosion of that, not as a parent, but as a former educator and as a citizen, I'm deeply concerned. So thank you for letting me have a chance to talk. Next time I'll try to remember to sign my name.
And I think specials are just that. They're special to our kids. I have a granddaughter, and when you ask what her special is, she believes up and wants to tell you what it was. I want to thank each of you for coming and sharing. We know that you really care about your kids, and we do too, and we know that that's what we're all here about. And I thank you for caring that much that you would take time to come and talk to us. And as board members, I know we'll be doing some research on our own, and thank you for the research that you presented. And we did not receive this. I don't recall seeing this before, so thank you for sharing it. And thanks for coming, and I can't promise that we'll be able to change things, but we will certainly be, it's on our radar, so. I encourage you to just keep doing what's best for your kids. And if you'd like to stay, you're welcome to.
Yeah, exciting.
But if you don't, then. Again, thank you.
Thank you
Thank you. Thank you.
for your time. Thank you.
So I do have, in addition to the agenda, the superintendent's report, I'd like the board to consider changing for this year our board meeting venues. We've talked a little bit about facilities and upgrades and the need to really look at our facilities. And I thought, what better time than to take our board meetings on the road, so to speak. And I know you've been a big proponent, Cheryl, of this.
Get in all the buildings, yes.
And so I have went ahead and put some dates and times and locations for your consideration, because you'll have to approve this. But so once a month for eight months, we have a building report out on special and neat things that are going on in their building. I thought it appropriate, as they've already signed up for those board presentations, that maybe we take our board member meetings to that particular school. Obviously, we went to Wigan Street last year, but it was during the camp out thing, and so the rest of the building was really busy, and so we found ourselves in Anne Marie's Croswell room, which I appreciate her like stretching it thin, but obviously if we have a board meeting, we'll be able to pick out our location. And for places like Wigan Street or East or Dan Abbott, we're probably talking gymnasiums and setting it, because we really have lack of space in lots of areas, but I just think it would be neat to not only take it on the road, but then to give board members and community members the opportunity to look in the building. I spent a lot of time in our buildings this summer looking at nooks and crannies, looking at spaces at Wigan Street where we could move the book rooms so that we brought nurses into every one of the schools this year for 4 hours, the elementary. Where can we put the nurse? And so, we were and there just isn't a lot of room. Yeah.
Is that a nurse?
No.
It is a nurse. It's a nurse assistant.
Okay.
Nurse assistant. We have a district nurse, and for the first time, we decided, because our district nurse couldn't get around to 8 buildings, so we hired nursing assistants. So every elementary has one for 4 hours every single day. And we wanted it to be from the hours of 9 o'clock when kiddos start, because, Johnny or Susie comes in, they have a bellyache right at the beginning of school. We oftentimes had our secretaries doing all of that. And then we have medications that need to be done. We have medications at lunch. We have coming off a lunch recess. We usually have skinned up, bruised up knees. And so we thought that was the right thing to do. Well, we didn't have a little nurses area in every building. And unfortunately at Wigan Street, there's one way to get down to the cafeteria, and it's through that little middle room, and that also served as a book room, an art room, a supply room, and yet we were able to kind of move some things that make it work. So I think it would be good for you to see some of our facilities. I got lost at East. You could truly go into the basement of East and find yourself back in the labyrinth. And so anyway, for your consideration, I've added that as an addition. Okay. Other than that, if it's okay, I'll go into the superintendent's report. Just some items for information. I sent out in the board update this weekend the School Safety Summit. If you're planning to go to that, it is September 12th. The link there is live. I sent out another reminder to principals to see who had interest in going. If we can pool up and partner up, we can do it. I don't know if you want to share any of that, but it's...
Well, I think everyone probably received it. It just talks about, all the participating groups that are going to be there supporting it. And I think there are at least 20 in the schedule. It gives the schedule. There are concurrent sessions at 11 a.m., 1 p.m., and 2:15 p.m. It's an all-day event, 8:30 to 4:30. But keynote speakers are excellent. One is coming from Parkland, I believe. And the other is the state of school safety in Ohio, what we know to be true, and recommendations for moving forward. Dr. Amy Clare, co-founder and director of Programs Education School Safety Network. So it looks to be a really exciting program.
It's free.
Important topic, and it's free. So
You need to register by a certain date.
If you know you're willing to go, I'd like to just get a registration. I don't know if they're limiting it at this point.
They are not limiting it. It's going to be at the nationwide Hyatt Regency. And he said, I talked to Rick Lewis, and he said, even if you don't register and walk in, then you'll be fine.
I think it can be reaffirming as well because
To see what we're doing.
yeah, we believe we're right there and doing lots of things that other districts are not doing. And so it affirms those things, but also come up with ideas that we can make things even safer. I gotta be honest, I've got 2 buildings in the district that I worry about. Wigan Street is one, 3 buildings, Wigan Street, Columbia, and East. You go up to the front doors of every one of those buildings and you get buzzed in, but you don't go into an office. You could, you know, if the right questions aren't asked or something, you could literally be anywhere you want in the building. And so how do we navigate that, and could we reposition classrooms? Anne Marie wasn't crazy about us taking her room over and turning it into an office. But you know, that makes some sense because that's the first room you get into, and yet at Columbia, the office is on the 2nd floor. I mean, so you literally get buzzed into the gym. You can go straight down to the kindergarten or up, and so Darcy at Columbia, when she buzzes someone in, she gets out of her seat, she walks around the corner, and she's making sure they're coming up the stairs. Same thing at East. And so we have some facility, again, facility conversations, that safety is even a big part of as well. So I think it could prove to be a nice summit if some of those are available to go.
Well, I would just encourage you to try
To see the shoe
So, and also in here, I've included in yellow, and you'll see it here, I've added as an item. I can delete it if you'd rather talk about this at a different time. But here is the list of buildings that will be presenting during the months that are listed there. And so September would be at East, Wiggins would be in October, the high school is November, Dan Emmett in December, and you can kind of see how it flows down through there. And I think, we're going to try to record things, and we're going to try to do some of that stuff. We'll have to take some things remote. But I think for this year, certainly, it is worthy of your consideration. So I do have 2 items for consideration, I guess, for you under superintendent's business. The first is a list of home and community school students' participation in athletics. And those, we've already sent letters and already verified. And then item 2 is a change in meeting locations.
Okay, I would entertain a motion to approve those 2 items as read.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Second.
I will, yes.
Were there any comments or questions?
Time would be the same, just
I think
consistent.
6 o'clock, we'd like to keep that time. Same unless the board has a different thought there. I mean,
Just with activities at the school, that all works out.
And this may be more convenient for parents.
might be.
Would you call them up, please?
Mrs. Getzmann?
Yes.
Mrs. Fiesel,
Yes.
Mrs. Regola-Dye?
Yes.
Dr. Bennett?
Yes, motion carried. Okay, the student liaison report. The first article was about teachers in 15 Southwest Ohio districts adopting a new learning app. And this new app helped Cincinnati City Schools, and there were 2 teachers named, Harvey Lewis and Bryce Carlson, who were attempting world record feats, and they wanted their classes to be involved, and they used it as an educational tool. And they gave the example that Bryce Carlson was trying to beat the record for rowing across the Atlantic, and while he was rowing, he was taking water samples and monitoring his nutritional intake. And that data then was sent back to the students so that they could use that data to create high interest, because it was their teachers, so it was practically things they could use and quality curriculum. But they pointed out that you don't need to go abroad. You can go to the grocery store and come up with a math lesson and energize your kids in that way and your students. The app isn't free, however, like so many are, so that's one drawback. The second article is about Southwestern City Schools working to prevent summer reading loss. We all are aware of that there's a slide in the summer. And the Center for Student Learning at Johns Hopkins University found that students who did not read during the summer showed diminished reading skills when they returned to school. And the teachers reported students who participated in library reading programs started the school year ready to learn, and they improved their reading achievement. They also pointed out that parents can serve as role models by reading in front of their kids. So I think that's important as well. And another important note was that the ESC of Central Ohio received over $600,000 from the federal government for literacy for birth through 5 and middle school and high school. So I'm hoping we're going to tap into some of that. The next article was interesting because it's about Fiona, the hippopotamus that was born prematurely, weighing 29 pounds, which doesn't seem small to me, but I guess that's very small for a newborn hippopotamus. And at the Cincinnati Zoo, and several scholastic magazines have featured the hippo, and reading and math exercises have been created based on Fiona's life. And one exercise, students were asked to calculate how many bathtubs the water in Fiona's zoo would fill, as an example. And the latest book is Saving Fiona, and it's a message of hope, never give enough, which is kind of a great message. So I thought that was kind of fun. The next article was about creating affordable, accessible makerspace. And the teachers at the International Society for Technology and Education annual conference shared ideas to help install makerspaces in schools that have limited resources. And one of the teachers pointed out what we really want our kids doing is building things with their hands and learning how things work. And she gets recycled materials and allows kids to tear them apart and then put them back together. And she said, in using things in nature. So a makerspace is any place where you're making things. So it doesn't have to be expensive CNC equipment and 3D printers, etc. You can start small if you don't have things. And how one teacher makes science lessons engaging is another article. And he describes, this is a physics teacher at New York City High School. He found science lessons boring as a student, and he now works to make the subject engaging to his students. He describes how he uses discovery labs, and he points out that when the teacher gets up and lectures and talks about the experiment and explains what's going to happen, then the students are supposed to replicate it. There's no discovery, there's no excitement and curiosity because they know how it's supposed to work out. So he points out when nobody knows the outcome of an experiment, these are the curiosity, investment, and the community of learners are all able to check in with each other, and that's what scientists are. And he said in his classroom, students work in groups. They use 2-foot by 3-foot wakeboards for group use, results in a collaborative worksheet. So that was a good approach. And then the research brief was more on the students' lives during the summer. And the study that they cite is they track the achievement of students in more than 500 schools and analyze the scores of more than 42,000 students from grades 3 to 6 and nearly 40,000 students from grades 5 to 8 in unnamed southern state. The gaps that they measured in their scores, on the average, students lost about 2 points out of a possible 250 points each summer. But that's each summer, so that would be cumulative, and a little more than 4 points each summer in math. And they found out that all students lose academic ground over the summer. There was no relationship between poor students versus rich students or by race or any other demographic factor that all students do lose. So I think the article about having your kids read is really a good one, and especially if you can find interesting things that will motivate them to read. I know our cinema requires the kids to read at least 20 minutes every day. And the 8 and 10-year-old, you know, they have to do it first thing in the morning to get it out of the way, because otherwise it becomes a chore. So, but you have to get exciting materials that they're going to be interested in.
So I'd like to add one thing to your report that is kind of exciting to me. So if you walk out the doors and look in the lot back here, you'll notice 2 buses. And we have talked about, we're in the process of figuring out how to design makerspace STEM buses. Usually we trade buses in that are really old, right? And they give us $1,200. I mean, it's like scrap. And I said last year, I said, let's not turn them in. Let's turn those into something that we could actually take to our elementaries as a mobile kind of a makerspace STEM piece. And so they're sitting out there. They just dropped them off because our last 2 new buses came. And so we're trying to decide, I'm thinking, could have lots of people help me think about this, about having the kids design these buses. Now, you know, if we're kind of gearing those a little more towards the elementary, do you get your 4th and 5th graders to start brainstorming what they would want on their bus, have all 6 buildings do it, then come together and then kind of vet it out, and then we could even have the older kids maybe fabricate, because I mean, I've got the footprint of exactly what it is. We could take every seat off, and you could have seats facing each other, and tables in the middle, and, you know, really create some of these neat, you could paint the bus. I mean, it could really be something kind of cool. We often thought of, if you pull a bus in this way, I've got 2 buses, could I pull the other bus in this way, and then have like a ramp that are in the back of the bus where this one goes into the front door of this one, and this one goes into the front door of this one, and all of a sudden you've got this circular mobile STEM piece. I mean, again, this is what I stay up at night. I know our kids could do some of this stuff.
Back to piano. My latest research, there are 3 books about piano, and one is illustrated by Richard Cowdery, and I'm not sure, did he author it as well?
No, he was just the illustrator. It's called Piano de
But he's
Hippo.
been traveling to the zoos.
He's a Mount Working resident.
Yes, lives in our district, and that's.
He did the Bad Dog Marley books.
Right,
So,
right.
yes.
So he's been doing lots of book signings right
Yeah.
now, but to be part of our district.
Yeah.
that's what he-
Yeah.
And his kids graduated from Mount
He
Working.
was down in Paragraphs.
He was last weekend.
Was it last
Oh,
weekend?
he's been, yeah, he's been
down
all
doing-
over,
yeah.
so that's a
I
big
think
guy.
it's just in town.
Did she?
2 quick points. Have you talked to SPY about helping make these buses? Or like Rachel or
I think I
Stephanie?
shared with them
Okay.
that we're thinking about that.
And we have an expert in our community on making maker spaces.
yeah.
Karen Jensen at the library, right, has done the tea maker space, and her whole shtick was that she did it on a budget. So, you know, we have resources.
We have a
to help
budget.
with that.
Tight budget.
Good tip.
No, I,
Also, Mrs. Solman in the kindergarten has loose parts, which is basically what you're talking about, and she's presented at conferences about her initiatives, and she's a great expert in our community.
and Kathy Kassler, who's our director of secondary curriculum, she's on the board of the makerspace, or that.
Oh, the non-slabs, right, and that's another piece too.
Yeah.
When I was referencing the makerspace at the library, at the public library, Karen Jensen's work.
So I think there's a lot of people who would enjoy weighing in on the conversation, and it sounds like we could actually maybe make that happen. Maybe the design is easier than the actual pulling out the benches, but it would be fun to, just kind of have those back there, and we take them on the
Get
road
those
for a
wheels
week over
turning.
at one school and a week at another school.
Well, and maybe even having them access to them outside of school hours. Really use
Items for recommendation under this section, I have just one. You're seeing more and more of our high school students take trips abroad. I think it's an awesome thing. And so now our English department is looking to take a trip to England and Paris with some English overtones, certainly. And so they're looking to go for about 10 days in June. I've told them that if they need anybody else to chaperone, I'm willing to go on that
There'd
one.
be some more.
Absolutely, I think you're right.
So just one item for your approval.
I'd entertain a motion to approve that item as referenced.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Rullo. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
And I read through that entire EF tour.
I did too.
It was so
Oh,
interesting,
it
it's
was.
so detailed, they really do a
Very
great job.
impressive. And that's June of 2020, not this
Right.
coming June, it's
Right.
a
And 18
year.
months to
18
raise
months to
it.
say,
A little bit of
yeah.
time there, yeah.
Yeah,
Any other comments or questions?
Nice opportunity.
absolutely.
Would you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Nicolai?
Yes.
Mrs. Getzmann?
Yes.
Mrs. Fiesel,
Yes.
Dr. Bennett?
Yes, motion carried. Okay, fiscal.
Our fiscal report for tonight is nothing too exciting. We just got the regular financial report. Mr. Senior, if you want to scroll down, you'll see we ended July, which is the first month of our new fiscal year, with $15 million. We did get most of our tax money in already in July, so that's why that balance is substantial there. If you go down to the next screen, you can see that we collected 43% of our real estate tax and 53% of our property tax. As you know, those come in January and July. So we usually get a little bit less in July because some people pay all of their taxes in January when they do their bills. So this is what we usually have. Our restricted grants and aid, the state foundation money, that's coming in just as we suspected. Let's see. We haven't transferred any, to see the 200,000 that we're looking at for revenue. That's the 200,000 that we'll transfer back from the PI fund, from the money that we advanced for the rooftop units last year and a half ago, I guess now. And then on the expenditures, everything is pretty much where it should be. You will notice on the retirement and benefits, that's 12% just for 1 month. That's because we do 2 payments for insurance in July, because we don't do one in June. And that was something that started before I came, and so in order to keep it so that we don't have an extra payment in June, we do it that way. So that's always like that. Our supplies and materials are a little higher, but then remember, it's the beginning of the school year, and most people get all their supply orders in now. So that's all I have for that. The good news, I know I wasn't here to talk about the at the end of 2018, we did get $104,000 in investment income. Again, if you look back at the history there, you can see that's pretty substantial. So we have to go way back to 2009 before we got anywhere close like that. So, and we already have 12,000, almost 13,000 for this fiscal year, just for 1 month. So that's a good thing. We do have meter and investment companies helping us with those investments. And I just spoke with Mr. Gruber tonight, and he's happy to come to one of the board meetings and go over our investments and how they work and show a little bit what he's expecting for the year. So we transferred some money over to them from the personal because they can invest in some things that are more.
And we are really limited in what we can do.
We are, and I had to take the courses to show that it's called CPL, that's we have to do those, and I've done those. Luckily, I was able to do one online. We used to have to go to some classes, so we have to do that. So. And then we have 3 donations. You can see there to Columbia Library, to the district staff. Those are some calendars that First Knox brought over, and then to the elementary students from Kroger, some school supplies for the meeting. So that's all I have.
Thank you. I would entertain a motion then to approve those 2 fiscal services items as well.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Wu. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Fiesel. Were there any questions? I guess the only thing I would say about the financial report, I noticed that our expenses are over our revenue right to begin with. Is there any way we can?
Well,
I mean, I know we'll strive really hard to.
yeah, with the salary increases and, the revenues are pretty stable. I mean, there's not really a lot we can do to increase the revenues, and we have this is the 3rd year of our salary, so we will be deficit spending because of those salaries.
And that concerns me.
And that's,
It's not a
unfortunately.
large amount, but it's still.
Well, and unfortunately, there's really no way to do that if you give increases to your staff, because, as you know, that's the biggest part of our expenditures. So whenever we do that, again, this is the 2nd year of our biennium, So I don't know what next year's state funding will be, but, you know, if we got a big increase there, but our tax money is very stable, and those are really about the only thing, again, other than some reimbursements, Medicaid.
I just
those
wanted to
kinds of
keep
things.
it.
No, I'm aware of that, and when we do the 5-year forecast in October, we'll go over some of that information so that we can plan that, you know, we have to make some decisions about that in the future. We don't like that.
Well, I think that's why we try to be really proactive. I mean, about 80% of all of our expenses are personnel. So this year, when we found the ability to not replace, due to numbers and enrollment, 5 staffing positions, that's the only place that we save anywhere significant. But unless you never give an increase, a cost of living increase, that number will always continue to.
Well,
Don't misinterpret what I'm saying.
No, I understand.
I'm not
No,
saying
you're
we
right,
should
you're
do
right.
it.
It's
I just want us to
understand.
keep an eye on it.
And we will, and definitely when we do the forecast in October, we'll look at that and have some discussions about what we're going to do. Obviously, this is the last year of our contract as well, so those will be some concerns.
I'm picking up insurance costs are pretty much.
Yeah, we did really well on
So
insurance,
that's
so,
a good
yeah,
thing.
it is.
0%.
But we remember that when we made the cuts before we passed the levy in 2013, we have reinstated some of those because we thought we needed to, because they were critical to education. So as Bill said, we brought some of the librarians back, you know, some of the things that we thought we should do because that's really important for our kids. So they all cost money. So, but yeah, we'll get into some detail about that for sure. Because I'm not happy about that. So,
Any other questions? Okay, would you call the roll, please?
sure. Mrs. Regola-Dye?
Yes.
Mrs. Fiesel,
Yes.
Mrs. Getzmann?
Yes.
Dr. Bennett?
Yes, motion carried. Thank you. Business services and legislative liaison.
Thank you.
See, it's getting warm in here, isn't it, right? You want the air on now, don't you?
Now, I'm very comfortable. We had, I didn't have a link because there hasn't been a whole lot of activity, but Governor Kasich did sign some bills. HB 87 regarding Ohio Department of Education to credit funds returned to the state because of the community school audit. And there were some amendments in that bill. The 5-year forecast deadline was moved from October 31st to November 30th. We are authorizing the superintendent or school board president to sign employment-related documents affecting the treasurer or the treasurer's family. And it also permits a board to propose a substitute levy at an election in February, May, or November in the year after a replaced levy is imposed. Would you have a question?
Only on the 5-year forecast, that November change doesn't go into effect until
Until-
next year.
Yes.
Because of the 90 days after it's signed.
Yes, thank you.
That's okay.
That was in there. And
I didn't know that at first, I was kind of thinking,
HB 318 regarding the qualifications and duties of a school resource officer. Some aspects of another bill, SB 264, were incorporated into that one. And that was on the focus of the use and requirement of positive social interventions and supports for kindergarten through grade 3, which we are already basically doing in Mount Vernon City Schools. Also included is prohibiting out-of-school suspensions and expulsions for K through 3, except for offenses that threaten health and safety of others. Included also was $2 million allocated for training in the PBIS and $12 million for SRO training. SB 216 is the whole Public School Deregulation Act, and it also addresses the Ohio Teacher Evaluation System, and that is so involved that it would take a day for us to go through everything. But basically, some of those deregulations we had talked about previously, and of course it didn't go far enough as far as what, you know.
It's a start.
Yes, it's a start. HB 312 requires schools to establish a policy regarding the use of credit cards. The law recognizes 2 scenarios for credit card use. 1, the treasurer retains possession of the card and users can check the card out for use. Or 2, Credit cards can be issued to employees, but there must be a compliance officer who checks the activity every 6 months. And that is basically all the activity that's been happening, anything at the state. Any questions or comments?
Sometimes that's good news, because we get a
Yes.
lot of mandates that
Oh,
we have
yes,
to try to
it's very-
find time
yeah.
to teach this or teach that, and
Yeah, and it's very nice not having to go through new policies, 20 new policies, so, thank you.
Is there board approval?
we had a number of items for board approval. 3 facility requests. Again, our facilities continue to get used by lots of groups. So these are the free ones. You'll see there, dynamic classroom for after-school mentoring. You've got some baseball and probably softball things in here. Mount Vernon Nazarene, we're using the parking lots for a music fest. Occasionally, we do have events where we do need to charge. Interestingly enough, as we were over at Heath at a football scrimmage, Johnstown High School's field was not completed yet. They have a AstroTurf. And they panicked and said, can we come and use your facility? And of course, we want to be a good neighbor, but they were going to pay for lights and all the other stuff. We were giving them completely free. So you'll see that there. Agreement with our architect and engineer, Fannie Howie and Associates. As the board knows, and as I shared in an update, we've been part of the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission since way back in the 2000s. They have done another reassessment of the district, and part of our responsibility is to have a firm validate their assessment of things that the Ohio Facility Commission will do and what they won't do. So that's just formalizing that there. Item 4 is our continued Heartland Outdoor Educational School. It's been going wonderfully over the past 3 or 4 years, and that's a contract for another year. And again, the Ariel Foundation pays half of that tuition for our kids in Mount Vernon, which is an incredible gift. And then finally, Tri-County Educational Service Center contract for Medicaid billing. So those items for your approval.
Okay, we have 5 items for approval. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Rodiger, a second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Ms. Metzger. Were there any questions or comments? Okay, would you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Revolti?
Yes.
Mrs. Getzmann?
Yes.
Mrs. Fiesel,
Yes.
Dr. Bent?
Yes, motion carried. Okay, student services.
Okay, I have no items for information tonight. You will notice in B that there is a contract with Mansfield Psychological Services. We were unable to replace a position that had been vacated and actually had no applicants there. So if you know anyone going to college to be a school psych, there's lots of jobs in Ohio right now. So we needed to contract with a company out of Mansfield, and they will do probably between 125 to 150 ETRs. A lot of those, most of those will be reevaluations, because every 3 years you have to reevaluate to find if the child is continuing to be eligible for special education. So they will do those as well as any new evaluations that need to be done. So it's a flat rate per ETR, whether it's a little bitty one or whether it's a very involved one with many, many, many documents. So that contract does allow us to get out of that contract if we would find a school psychologist to just employ as our own employee like we've done historically. So there is an out if we need to, but
Isn't there I'll wait for a motion.
sorry, that's all I have.
Okay, I would entertain a motion to approve that item.
Be glad to make
Mrs.
it.
Fiesel, do I have a second?
Second?
Thank you. Mrs. Revolti. I had the question about,
I have a question while you
you
think.
go ahead.
So if a referral is made, like, are you comfortable that it'll be quick?
Well, there are federal timelines, and so it has to meet all those deadlines. This agency will be doing only half of the district, because if you recall, we have 2 school psychologist positions that are full-time employees, and we still have one of those psychologists who handles 3 elementary buildings and a high school. This agency will do the other 3 elementary buildings and the middle school,
as well as St. Vincent. We do St. Vincent, the other site does Seventh-day Adventist when we have, because we have a child find responsibility with those two.
And how many days is it for federal guidelines? What referrals need?
An initial referral is 30 days in order to get consent signed and the planning form done. And then the district has 60 days to complete all of that testing. If the child qualifies, then we have 30 days to put the IEP in place. The timelines are a little bit different on a reevaluation. The timelines are not as, they really are not those same timelines. But we have to do the reevaluations within 3 years minus a day. So every 3 years, we're doing every kid in the district. So there's this constant revolution.
Thank you.
Did you
Question-
remember?
Yeah, the question I had was just, you said there was an escape clause, but wasn't there a period of 60 days?
I think it's like 60 days. We're not real confident that we're going to find, because we had no applicants. And we're hearing that from other districts as well and other educational service centers that they're having difficulty too.
We kept our application open in the event that we could. You know, there may be another graduation cycle,
Right.
generally December, January. And if we could find that right person, we would rather have someone here on staff. Not only does it make sense for us for lots of reasons, but financially it's really expensive to use an outside agency. And it's just really sad and unfortunate that we're even in this situation. Irregardless, if we had to work with them for a year, we would certainly strive to recruit someone over the summer.
And you said probably 125, 150?
I would say 125 to 150 is what we're looking at.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I'd just like to, on behalf of the board, again extend our sympathies to the Denzer family, the loss of Quinn, who had been hired to be our school psychologist. And in some ways, it's a tribute to her because right now she's irreplaceable.
Thank you for that. And I would just add to that, I've been in contact with the family as well as her dissertation proctor or mentor at Kent State. And if you know anything about Quinn and what she demonstrated to us so passionately was the bullying piece. She did her dissertation on that, used what she calls bully busters. And I asked the family and asked this mentor if we could utilize her dissertation and somehow incorporate perhaps some of those things. Some we're doing, but the things that she might have really instilled as even a further way to kind of intertwine and memorialize what she was going to bring to the district.
Thank you.
Mrs. Hazel?
Yes.
Mrs. Regola-Dye?
Yes.
Mrs. Getzmann?
Yes.
Dr. Bennett?
Yes, motion carried. Personnel.
Under personnel, I have one item for information there. It's Amy Miller, our orchestra director, and she will be taking a half year's leave of absence for family reasons. And you know, we'll look very forward for her coming back middle of the year. Under the employment section, you're going to see pretty much the standard kinds of things, some additional substitute teachers, home instructors, department heads, both at the high school and the middle school. We do have some supplementals listed there. As you know, the middle school and the high school is moving towards a learning management platform called Schoology. And so we're doing some master training work there, where they'll be spending some time really beginning to make that transition. We've got a whole list of Friday, Saturday school teachers. Obviously, they're not all working every Friday. We've never actually had a Saturday situation since I've been here, but I think we've always entitled it that way. And then we do have a couple teachers I do need to bring your attention to. Mary Jo Berensmeyer is a rehired Latin teacher, and so we're glad to have her back. As you can imagine, Latin is a difficult teaching candidate to find, and she's willing to come back part-time for us. And Julia Holler is coming to us from Ohio University. And she's a band director because of Andy Sutton's resignation. We moved Megan Avio up and move Julia in there, and she is a fire plug. And wonderful to see her out there. Of course, you've got some others. Deanna Severance, I would mention that she is also a rehired teacher who was at Pleasant Street most of her career. And, you know, as she's been out for a year or so, there was an opening where we had very few applicants, and she was ready to come back. She missed it that much, and she was just an outstanding teacher. And so that is there for your consideration. We do have a few extracurricular positions here for non-school employees, as well as some volunteers and a retirement correction. So those items, all those items for your approval.
Okay, we would entertain a motion to approve those personnel certificated licensed staff.
I'll move the motion.
I'll second that.
And were there any questions?
The Schoology Master Training Program, can you just kind of explain that to me a little bit?
Sure. So because we're implementing this at both the middle school and the high school, we're kind of doing what's called a train-the-trainer model. And so for 2 days, a number of us came in, and all the people you saw there, and they trained us on how to be implementers of this Schoology platform. And basically, if you've ever seen college classes or your kids take classes, there's this site that you go to, and it has, you know, all of their classes. It has their syllabus. It has their assignments. It has their check-in days. I mean, all of their course material can be housed there. That's basically what we're implementing from a 6 through 12 community. And so these folks are trained, and they'll spend this year training teachers throughout the course of the year, and hopefully by the end of the year we'll be at that point where we can fully implement.
So this is something every year we'll be doing?
No, it really should just be for that implementation piece.
And then there's a fee, right?
I'm sorry?
The fee for this?
To have Schoology or for the mentors?
Well, the actual program.
The program, there's a yearly fee for that, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, that's how they keep themselves in business.
Any other questions? Would you call the roll, please?
Mrs. Fiesel,
Yes.
Mrs. Getzmann,
Yes.
Mrs. Regola-Dye,
Yes.
and Dr. Bennett.
Yes, motion carried. And we have one more employment.
We do. As a separate item for employment, as a substitute teacher, we have a Mr. Ryan Getzmann. We've separated it out for our board member, Mrs. Getzmann. She's not able to vote on such an item, so we did pull that out for board approval.
I would entertain a motion for that item.
So moved.
Ms. Regola-Dye, do I have a second? Please vote. And assuming comments or questions, so we can call the roll, please.
Mrs. Regola-Dye.
Yes.
Mrs. Fiesel,
Yes.
Mrs. Getzmann,
Abstain.
Dr. Bennett.
Yes, the motion
That's rent money, maybe. They bring that home, doesn't it?
Okay, and classified staff.
Under classified staff, we have no items for information at this time. Again, some of the typical recommendations for board approval. You'll see a couple rescinded contracts. Those are really only in regards to they've been elevated to different positions within the district. And so we have to rescind contracts and reissue contracts. And you'll see some of those there. And we do have some substitute employment. Just 4 items for your approval.
Okay, entertain a motion for this 4 items.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Regola-Dye, do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Yes, and were there any questions? Okay, would you call the vote?
Mrs. Regola-Dye.
Yes.
Mrs. Getzmann.
Yes.
Mrs. Fiesel,
Yes.
Dr. Bennett.
Yes, motion carried. And I think to adjourn it unless you need.
I have nothing for executive session at this time, unless the board has anything they would like to discuss. That meets one of our executive session guidelines.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
And would you call the roll?
Mrs. Regola-Dye.
Yes.
Mrs. Fiesel,
Yes.
Mrs. Getzmann,
Yes.
Dr. Bennett.
Yes. Okay, we are adjourned.
So quiz to the board, where's our meeting next month?
East.
East Elementary, we're taking it on the road.